Oh,
Recording in progress.
good evening. At this time, we'd like to call to order the Finance Committee meeting of the City Council of Palo Alto for Tuesday, April 29th, 2025. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Rectal,
Here.
Councilmember Lithcott-Haynes,
Here.
and Chair Burt.
Here. Okay. We have two items before us tonight, but before we dive into them, we have an opportunity for members of the public to speak on any item not on the agenda, but is within the purview of this committee. Do we have any speakers?
No public comments.
All right, we'll move right on to our first item, which is a consideration of a recommendation to the City Council for subsidy options for select development service fees related to gas and electric appliances. Is that Director Late? You starting off?
Well, yes, thank you, Councilmember Burt. And just welcome. I forget if we're formal or informal here. Okay, that's what I was struggling with. Sure. In any event, this is a follow-up from, I think it was about 4 to 6 weeks ago. We came back and we presented some findings on our fee study. We had received some direction from the committee, specifically with respect to fee subsidies regarding electrification and permitting of gas appliances as well. Sarah McRee in our office has prepared this report and will give the presentation.
Good evening, Finance Committee. Sarah McCree, Senior Operations Manager for Planning and Development Services. Joining us today, we have Director Late. We also have Chief Building Official George Hoyt and our Assistant Director of Climate Action, Jonathan Abensheim. Next slide, please. So today, the item before you is a follow-up to the March 4th discussion on the Planning and Development Services Cost of Services Study. We will be presenting high-level recommendations regarding the building permit fee subsidies, and we're also soliciting feedback on the implementation approach and funding needs for potential electrification subsidies. Next slide. So as a reminder, the cost of services study proposed in the last meeting right-sized our fees to achieve 100% cost recovery. It remains within the direct discretion of the Finance Committee and City Council to subsidize fees to support community objectives. The two objectives that were identified in the last meeting were electrification and community safety through gas appliances. Next slide. Staff has two recommendations before you today. The first is to implement targeted subsidies for electrification permits through our electrification program. And the second is to subsidize standalone gas HVAC permits to instant permit costs. And this is through using general fund support. Next slide. For the approach on electrification subsidies, the report lays out a couple of options of how we would implement such a subsidy. At this time, staff recommends a flat rebate administered by the utility staff for a couple of reasons. The first is that it utilizes existing infrastructure, and the second is that it minimizes administrative requirements. For the other options, some of them require additional staff and are more administratively complex. Yes. Sure. I actually,
go ahead.
No question.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to minimize staff time. I don't want you guys wasting your time and jumping through hoops unnecessarily. But when I look at this, I would think that issuing it at the time of permit, option 2 would be less work for you than option 1. Can you talk about who has to do the work and why you think number 1 is simpler?
Sure, I can answer that. I'll also invite Jonathan Abensheim, who is leading some of this work related to the electrification subsidies. So the difference between option 1 and option 2 is that option 1 is a flat rebate that doesn't require back-end administrative accounting. So someone would essentially get their permit and then go to the utilities department to apply for their rebate. And there's no.
So I'd have to pay, if I'm a resident, I have to pay my full amount in. And then I drive over to, or bike over to the utilities and then say, hey, here, can you give me my rebate? And then you give me a check.
That is correct. And then the,
Yes, that. Jonathan Obshine, Assistant Director for Climate Action. Yes, after installation.
the second option is that we would apply a flat rebate at the time of permit issuance, but this requires tracking on our end, and some accounting on the back end to do internal transfers, in order to process those. And it would be setting up whole new processes.
And can I ask a follow-up question?
Please
We were talking about physically going from one place to another, but is this able to be done online?
Yes.
And how simply for the customer? How easy is it?
I mean, you'd expect the customer to do that at the same time as they're submitting for their rebate, or their water heater or for their HVAC, at that time. And that'll work for FY 2026, which is what we're talking about here.
And so then can you go in more detail about the difference between I understand now 1 and 2, that makes sense now. The difference in 3 and 4.
Sure. So for option 3, subsidized electrification related portion of each permit, this would be an upfront subsidy that would be calculated. This is really complex because it requires a plan reviewer and a project coordinator to essentially go through each project and identify, and it's kind of tricky, what portion qualifies. So it's a lot more difficult to set what those standards are and to apply those subsidies.
Okay, so this would be not a flat amount, but it would vary depending on how complex your electrification
Exactly.
was. And so this would be the same, apart from not being flat, it would be the same thing as number 2 then, except it's a non-flat version of option 2?
That's correct.
Okay,
And then option 3 is essentially a non-flat version, except it would be through the rebate process. So essentially, when someone goes, I'm sorry, number 4, essentially when someone comes in to get their plans review, we would need to be able to determine what portion qualifies for these subsidies, and then it would be through the utilities rebate.
okay. And so from the customer standpoint, they would do the paperwork once, submit it in, and then pay, and then eventually get reimbursed.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And so I think options 1 through 4 generally go from a standpoint of increased complexity for staff and the reconciliation and trying to find the permitting, but it's also option 1 is also consistent with how we approach this today relative to other rebates that we have been working on. So it's familiar, at least it's a familiar system for our staff, but also for customers who have participated in this process before, contractors or whoever. And so we thought that might be add some ease to the process as well.
But when I did my water heater, didn't you give money to Synergy? Wasn't there, I don't remember getting a rebate back. I thought there was a.
Yeah, in that case, it would have been the full service program if you worked with Synergy, and that we pay them directly. But if you were to go get your own contractor, then you'll need to pay the permit and then you'll need the rebate.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
So at this time, I also want to highlight that next Monday, there will be a city council study session that will be discussing the FY 2026 funding related.
I just want to, that's moved to May 12th.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Yep.
And so this discussion is really to solicit feedback as they are working through that. Next slide, please. So some of the implementation considerations we've highlighted in the report for you are the funding sources, scalability and simplicity of the rebate program or subsidy, and future fiscal impact. What's really important here is that while in FY 2026, there is budget to support these programs, staff expects that there will be increased demand due to the regional air district mandates, and funding for 2027 and beyond are not currently planned for and budgeted. Next slide, please. Next, for the standalone,
Excuse me, sorry, before we move on to the gas, just on the electrification, can you give us a sense of what the cost of a permit is for, say, a heat pump water heater or a heat pump furnace versus the rebate? Sorry, not the cost of the appliance, but the permit cost.
sure. Are you looking for,
Wondering what it costs to get a permit and what they get for having complied with our process by getting a permit.
got it. So I can speak to the permit costs, and maybe Jonathan Abendschein, you can speak to the rebate piece. So I'll speak to kind of two items that we've compared. For HVAC and water heaters, standalone items, I'm sorry, let me actually go back. For water heater, single family standalone items, currently they are about 280 to 292. The new fees that will go up to 298 for an instant permit, which is pretty nominal. And then for a standalone regular permit, that'll go up to 575. For HVAC, the regular permit currently is at 542, and the new fee will go up to 766.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the instant permit
Sure. For which one? Both of them or
for the water heater?
water heater? Today, the water heater instant permit is 292, and it goes up to 298.
I'm asking what the rebate.
Yeah, can I confirm with you for a second?
Yes.
Or maybe we can come back to that question?
Yeah.
Maybe we finish the presentation. and
Yeah,
come back.
I just need the. Well, so on the rebate, currently the water heater rebate is $298. We don't yet have an HVAC rebate established, but around $500 is what we were looking at. The current rates vary. The current, permit fees tend to vary a little bit from application to application. And so we're still determining that amount. But with this change, I think it'll be easier to determine the amount going forward.
So did you just say that the water heater permit costs 298 or will under the new rates and the rebate is the same exact amount?
Yes,
So people pay it, install it, come back and have the fee they paid to make it happen
Right.
totally deducted.
Yep.
So two transactions
yes,
in some ways
yes.
instead of zero.
No, yeah, two transactions.
Yeah. Just makes me wonder if there's a way to say like, hey, I'm about to do this. I promise I'm going to do it. I did it. Great. You didn't have to pay anything and that we didn't have to go through the transaction process at all.
Well, that's, if you roll back, that's option 2, I believe it is. If you go back to the previous, there we go. It's off.
Flat
That's what
rebate at
option
time
2
of
is.
permit
But there's
means
an,
you don't pay for the permit. You get the rebate. You pay it and it's deducted. So
Right.
your balance is zero.
but there's an accounting process that has to happen behind the scenes.
Can you explain the need for the accounting process? What prevents us from simply reducing the fee in a way
So-
that incorporates that?
Sure, maybe I can help with that. It's the funding source. So different funding source, different colors of money have different strings attached to it. The rebates are coming from one funding source. The permit activity is occurring in a different funding source. And so we need to, on the back end, make sure we're aligning our sources and uses, and that's the accounting transaction. So as an example, the work being done for permitting is being done in the general fund. That's where the development center lives and the cost recovery of the fees. When we're talking about these rebate programs, we're talking about programs that are running through the electric fund. And so different fund paying for a service that's being expended out of the general fund. So administratively, to track both the financial transfers that would need to occur. And remember, any movement between funds requires a council action, no matter how little or big it is, as well as the administration to track whether or not someone has implemented a permit that was pulled, are two of the kind of pieces that I understand, you know, as an individual pulling it, it's probably easiest to be like, great, I don't need to do anything, one and done. It takes all of that transactional work and puts it to the city.
And don't forget that the customer's doing 2 transactions anyway. Even if they were to get their permit fees completely waived at the counter, they still want to get their water heater rebate or their HVAC rebate. And so they're going to have to go through this whole filing process anyway. So we're thinking as long as the customer is doing both of those things anyway, we might as well just keep it administratively as simple as possible and pay the rebate out when we pay the other rebates out to them.
Moving on to the standalone gas HVAC subsidy. I wanted to highlight here that we are only proposing the subsidy for HVAC because the other gas appliances like gas furnace, boilers, and water heaters, those are actually already at the instant permit cost of $298. So this was the only fee that we looked at to bring it down to the level of instant permits. So
When you say gas HVAC, that's forced air furnace? Is that basically? Yep.
So go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, it is.
And so we're reducing fees for the standalone gas HVAC. And why are we doing that?
So one of the asks was for us to look at ways to encourage permit compliance. Sorry, and I missed that in the beginning of this. This is the second piece of the ask by the Finance Committee, was to look at how can we do that, whether it's through a subsidy or enforcement. And so we're bringing forward this proposal to bring down the fees from roughly $575. I'm sorry, actually, I have the wrong one. $766. Actually, sorry, let me just, yes, that's correct. $766 down to this $298 fee. And the idea behind this is that we're bringing it down to the cost of an instant permit, which is our simplest and lowest cost permit, to encourage folks to continue to keep coming in to get those permits. So this will come at a cost of about $50,000 a year from the general fund. Next slide, please. Oh,
Not just get the permit, but for all of the things that come with it, to get the inspection to make sure that it's installed correctly. Because that's the concern ultimately that we have, is that if these are, it happens often where contractors miss some key requirements in the building code that are not, could be harmful to the occupants. And so we really want to encourage people to come in and make sure that they're getting the permit, that they're installing it correctly, that it was installed correctly. I mean, that's one of the values of coming in and getting the city and having the city endorse the fact that it's been done according to codes, especially when we're dealing with gas lines.
And do we currently have a requirement upon sale of property to have a verification that these systems were permitted?
I don't believe that we do.
Aren't there some
Mr.
things
Clark,
what things are covered upon sale? There's quite a bit, right? Trying to recall, it's been a while since.
When we bought our house, the kitchen was done without a permit and they had to disclose that. But
good afternoon, everybody. George Hoyt, Chief Building Official. Thank you for your question, Councilmember Burt. One of the things that I do know is for sale is the confirmation of smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, water efficient fixtures, those are the things that are required by sale. We do get a lot of public records requests for mortgages regarding outstanding violations on a property. And so if there's an expired permit or so on and so forth, that will be flagged for the mortgage companies, but there is no requirement to confirm that everything you have done in your structure has been properly permitted. But I do believe that per the real estate agreements, they have to disclose those items.
Only the ones you just mentioned, not like this item.
Well, technically, they should disclose if they didn't get permits or they did work without permits. If they did an addition, they should disclose that they did that without permits.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
when we get in discussion, I'll be interested in
Okay.
exploring that more. Julie?
Yep, thank you. I wasn't a part of the meeting where this was initially discussed, and so I apologize for asking something others may know the answer to, but can you give me a sense of the scope of this problem? Clearly, we have the concern that people are not coming in for permits when they're installing these things. How big is that number? How do we predict what the number of people who aren't complying is? And what percentage of that are we solving, do we think, by putting this incentive program in place?
So maybe I'll take a first cut and invite others to weigh in. We actually don't know the answer to the question because we don't know the universe of activity that's taking place. We do, there's been some studies and some legwork done by staff to suggest that maybe 20% or so are pulling permits for, at least for water heaters. And, you know, I couldn't tell you if that number is similar for HVAC or other units. The reason we flagged this initially is because for some, whatever fee we charge, the fact that somebody has to go through a process is going to discourage them from wanting to pull a permit, or maybe it happens, you know, on a weekend or at night, and you just want to get your water heater replaced. All we're trying to do is not, when we correct the fees to the current, you know, level of service that is being provided, we didn't want to further discourage folks from seeking to obtain a permit. And we have some other areas in which we want to educate and let people know how simple the process is with the instant permit, which we have expanded, and we continue to look at ways to improve. Kitchen and bath is an example where we knew that we had a problem with folks doing work without permits. We heard from contractors saying, this is undercutting my business. I'm going through the process of getting a permit and I'm being undercut by people who are not. So we recognized that we needed to streamline our process to make it easy for folks who are playing by the rules and encourage folks who might be discouraged by that to come get a permit. And we continue to look at ways that we can do that.
All right, so at this time, we're requesting that Finance Committee consider and provide feedback on the electrification permit fee subsidy options. We're also asking the Finance Committee to recommend moving forward on the subsidy for standalone HVAC gas appliances and to provide any guidance for the FY 2026 budget considerations for general fund support. Next slide, please. In terms of looking forward, and there's a correction here. It looks like the council study session that we'll be discussing the electrification subsidy funding will now happen on May 12th. For the fee study itself, after this meeting, should Finance Committee recommend subsidies, that will move forward into the regular budget process. Post-adoption in June, we will be implementing all of the fees from the study, as well as the subsidies 60 days after adoption. And with that, we are open to any follow-up questions. I will also note that we do have our fee study consultants, Matrix Consulting Group, available for any questions as well. Jonathan Abenshine. The Jonathans are throwing me off, sorry. Jonathan Abenshine, is there anything you'd like to add related to the electrification programming?
Well, just that the maintenance of the instant permit at $298, I think, will allow our rebates to cover in FY26 to cover most of the applications that come through our door with the existing permit budgets, but we're gonna have to take a look at the increased standalone permits and what frequency those are used at. We think that's the minority, to figure out what budget impacts there might be to the single family electrification programs in FY26. And if additional budget is needed, we need to come to the council with that. I think we're also looking ahead to 2027 and beyond, when the air district regulations come into effect. And I think having these instant permits puts us in a good position to be able to serve a large fraction of people who might show up needing permits for electrification projects at that time. But we'll also really need to look carefully at how many people are not going through the instant permit process and what the implications will be for them.
Thank you for the presentation. It feels like a big behavioral economics question. How do we incentivize the right behaviors? Because at first blush, it looks like on the gas thing, we're, making it easier, making it more attractive for people to install gas, when bigger picture, we don't want them to be installing gas at all. And yet we want the gas that they do install to be permitted. So I'm just wondering how the thinking that went into pull this lever, this happens, then this happens, and this happens, such that this is the right solution now, and it doesn't undercut our larger goal of 100% electrification one day.
So that's exactly what we were struggling with as well, and certainly welcome the Finance Committee's perspective on how we strike that balance better if we haven't hit it yet. I guess the main thing is just to come back to a couple of points that we've mentioned. One is, from our perspective, it's really a safety issue first. We do have the interest of wanting to reduce our carbon, have carbon reduction and transition toward electrification, but we want to make sure that people are living in safe homes, and we don't want our permit process and permit fees to be a detriment or a barrier to people living, having work done and having it done properly. And so what drove that then was there's a relatively small volume of work, I think, and it's increasingly getting less, that involves gas lines and gas appliances, gas water heaters, and HVAC or forced air units. And I believe, and Jonathan could speak to this, and you may already know more about this, just the state, the Air Resources Board is pushing more and more standards. And so I think within the next couple of years, there's going to be some requirements that preclude the sale of gas appliances. So we actually think this is going to transition anyways. And so just given that trajectory and giving our interest for making sure that we have safe buildings, we struck it at our lowest cost fee. We don't think it's going to be incentivizing people to do it. People will do it. But I don't think this fee is the determinant on whether they will convert to electrification or not. It may influence whether they get a permit or not. Anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I'd agree with that assessment. There are so many other barriers that I think are bigger than the permits. And so I think, we're talking about FY 2026 here. I think having that fee in place during FY 2026 is not going to create a significant enough disincentive or incentive for people to go to gas if we could otherwise convince them to go electric. And then, of course, starting in January 1st, 2027, the air district regulations kick in, and sale of gas water heaters is prohibited in the Bay Area. And I know that CARB is working on similar regulations.
Keith?
Quick question. This applies to both single family and multifamily housing? Okay. And to me, that's important, because if I live in the house, I already have an incentive to go through the safe route. My landlord doesn't live there, and he might not be quite as eager to spend the money. And so maybe we should be considering more the residents as opposed to the landowners.
So I appreciate the recognition that we're looking at behavioral economics, behavioral psychology. Kind of reminds me of one of the great shortcomings of our whole COVID response, which that we asked the global leading infectious disease expert, Anthony Fauci, to be a global leading behavioral psychologist, which he was not. And I think it's a real fallacy that there are people who study this kind of thing and the rest of us don't. And it reminds me that I think it was Debbie Meitels was aware of a group at Stanford that is looking at behaviorism related to climate change actions and initiatives. And we may, on whether this or other things, we may be somebody they'd be interested in engaging with, because we're right down to earth struggling with these kinds of questions. So having said that, what then the bottom line when we look at our subsidies for the electric appliance and then the fee subsidy for the gas, if I want to get a electric HVAC or hot water heater versus a gas, what are my fee costs? And then, because the subsidy that we're giving is really for the equipment differential primarily, not for the fee on the electric. And so I guess if we just looked at the fee part, what are they both the same net fee after subsidies? And we're just giving one from the general fund and one from the electric? What's the net comparison?
No, the idea is that someone who's electrifying a water heater would pay no fee, while someone doing a gas water heater would pay a $298 fee.
Okay, we'd have no fee on the electric.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I think that was
No, yeah.
it wasn't clear. Okay, that's good. And the whole instant and online approach, that's really great, that we're moving that direction for multiple reasons. So really supportive of that. And then we are still looking at subsidizing a gas replacement, and that's a real struggle for all of us. On the one hand, we want them to come in from the cold, so to speak, and but we got heartburn over subsidizing gas. So out of all alternatives that we might approaches we might take as an alternative or as a supplement to this, one is on the communication side. How well do the residents, and perhaps more importantly, all the licensed contractors at least, understand the obligations to get permits? And what are the consequences of not obtaining a permit, not just for the resident, but for the contractors? So what are the current ones? And then I'm interested in, could we instead focus on, not that we are going to go out with, we talked about downside of fines, that it requires enforcement. There's different kinds of enforcement, and we may not have active enforcement that costs us a lot, but we could still have consequences. And when we find out about a contractor who hasn't done it, and the second or third time they do it, the fines go up to the contractor, and perhaps significantly. Now, we know that there are unlicensed people who are doing these things, including on hot water heaters, do-it-yourself folks. So any thoughts on approaching this through a strong communication program? They have everybody understand their obligation. They could still violate the obligation, but it starts with making sure that homeowners are really clear that they're breaking the law if they don't get a permit. And a lot of people, when you really put it to them that way, they go, well, if you don't tell me I'm really breaking the law, I kind of think I'm skirting something. But if you're black and white, say, okay, I'm not going to do that. And so any feedback on if we had a strong communication and then a fine program that we wouldn't expend a lot of resources pursuing who didn't do it, but when we find out, we would do that. Oh, and the third component of that would be obligations upon sale of the property. So if we put those together as a package, how might they work compared to the subsidies?
So I'll take a first cut, and again, welcome others to weigh in. So, and George here in particular, this is your area, but if we do from time to time come across contractors or folks who are doing work on property without having obtained a building permit, or they're doing something that is not consistent with the plans that were approved, or any number of scenarios. And we will address those in the moment as they come up. Sometimes if it's a repeat offender or if it's a particularly egregious, issue, we do engage the state contractors board, and they will investigate and they'll collect information from us, and they'll pursue their own administrative remedies.
Can I ask on that? Do we have the authority to prohibit contractors who are repeat violators from doing business in our city versus going to the state contractors board?
I believe if they have a license, they're able to work in the city, but do you have any other information?
That's my understanding. Yes, that we do not have a local business license. So.
Right. And I would want to think more with our city attorney's office about what our local regulation might be in that regard. So that's one way. Again, there's also a lot of work that's being done by individuals who are not licensed contractors too, and that is even harder to then regulate. And so that gets to the communication and sharing with property owners the value and benefit of getting a licensed contractor to do the work. And so we could. So you asked, is there a local, can there be a local regulation? We do have fines if somebody does do work without a permit or inconsistently. We can cite them with our existing authority in the code, which can escalate depending on a number of factors. And then I'm actually just looking at my notes because as you were talking, which I'm finding is not very helpful in this. Yeah, so upon sale, that's a local regulation that we could explore. I'd like to understand more what the county offers in terms of its requirements, and just I think it's challenging when one jurisdiction has a set of different rules, but it's also not uncommon for realtors to be aware of that. In terms of the outreach piece, there's a number of ways that we can explore getting the message out. For folks who have registered with our permitting system, we have their contact information. That's property owners, that's contractors, anybody who's trying to pull a permit. We frequently send emails to that group to let them know about updates. We could use utility mailings as another vehicle. The city manager's communications office, and social media could be other ways once we've developed a messaging campaign about that. I mean, those are some initial ideas, and there may be certainly others.
And George, do you happen to know the escalating fine structure? I mean, we don't want to come with first time a contractor does something wrong, but we want to really capture those who are deliberately circumventing what they know to be the requirements.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I think our fine schedule outlines $500 for a violation of the building code, which this would be for not pulling a permit, and then it increases up to 150 for the second, 200%.
Yeah, actually, I think it was
the third.
I think it's 250, 500, 1,000.
Is that what it is?
Maybe the
Okay.
escalation.
Sorry about that.
Julie? Yeah.
To piggyback on Pat's point about communication, I was just searching on the city website because I think what we have to ask is, how do homeowners know what their obligations are and where do they go to find them? And I just searched under search, find and connect, that big search bar at the top. Do I need a permit to whatever? And not helpful information comes up. So then at the top on the menu bar, The final item is I want to ... which is awesome. You click on that and there are about 40 different things you might want to do. They're not in alphabetical order. And so you're scanning for, is this lengthy list of interesting things the city thinks I might need help with, from visit the Palo Alto Junior Museum to submit a public records request to apply for a job with the city. Like, where do I go to, like,
They're not categorized.
they're not categorized. Not as far as I can tell. And so I think it's a wonderful opportunity to say, wait a minute, are we even properly informing? Do we have the right to expect people, like, okay, I'm supposed to have a permit for my hot water heater. Am I supposed to have a permit if I have to replace a plank in my floor? You know, what if there's a drip on my wall? Like, at what point does it become at the level that constitutes whatever the term is for, you know, the city has a right to be concerned about this versus not? And I don't, on first glance, I'm not seeing that we're sort of we're not facilitating people's understanding of those categories.
And while I had kind of presented these three things as potentially a package, the communication stuff could go right along with our permitting, and because just reducing the permit cost is not necessarily going to significantly break through on compliance. But I do think that a better understanding of obligations won't be anywhere near perfect conformance, but I think it would significantly improve compliance.
Yeah, thank you, and appreciate those comments. And I agree, there's more that we can do on our website in terms of getting the message out. I did take notes on that, and independent of any action that you take here this evening, we will pursue that and specifically try to get some information on the webpage that talks about when a permit is required for what types of activities. These are all things that we have on our list of things that we want to get done. And so we'll, I'm encouraged that we'll be able to move more quickly on that.
Maybe I'll just highlight one of the things that we're looking at adding is we're working on scoping out, looking at building a permit wizard. And we're hoping to work on that this coming fiscal year to have a permit wizard so that folks can see and go through the process and answer questions, and it'll lead them to say, do you need a permit for this? What type?
So permit wizard, is that a virtual tool? Is that what we're talking about? Or
It's we're limited by our land use management tool, Acela, which is the platform that is used by many jurisdictions, and it's a really big company now. And their interface, we just have to work with it, and it's not the most intuitive engagement when you're trying to pull a permit. And there are companies that have developed a way for customers to interface with that platform that's more intuitive and easier to use. And we've gone through a couple of, met with a few of those developers, and we've seen a few different models. And I think we're still working on trying to get one that we think is going to work for us. It's not going to solve the problem, but it's supposed to just be really simple. You plug in some basic information. We try to collect some information to build up the permit and be really clear about what type of permit somebody needs. And all they would need to know is a little bit about what they want to do. And then the rest of it will be a guided set of questions, simple questions that get people to where they need to be. So that's the idea. It's not AI, but it's, at least at this point, but it is a set of asking questions to get people through this tree to get them where they need to be.
Well, I'm a little surprised that those companies aren't just already adopting AI. It seems like a natural fit, and maybe they are months away.
Yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier utility inserts. Is that part of the plan?
Yeah, we absolutely could do that as well. We can explore any number of options to see how we can communicate on these issues about pulling a permit for these types of appliances.
Great. And graphics would be great for people, just say, oh, still okay. Drip on the wall.
And video. You know, do I need a permit? Well, it depends. Are you doing this, this, this? No. Are you doing this, this, this? Maybe. Definitely come here to find out. We want you to be in compliance. We want to support you. I think for new homeowners, I just imagine this could be generational. The younger that you may not realize, you may not have had somebody hand that knowledge down to you. Like, oh, you bought a home. Guess what? Just because you can get the appliance at Sears or whatever the equivalent of that is today, you know, you're not allowed to, right? You're not allowed to just go in and install it. The city has an interest in this. I
Sorry,
bet a lot of
Councilmember,
people don't know.
What was that store?
Well, and not just generational, but cultural. I mean, a lot of immigrants from different countries are going, what? I need a permit for that? That's crazy, you know, and great. Okay, so we need to,
I have one question,
Yeah.
a color money question. So I'm not sure who's going to answer this. So if someone pulls a permit, let's say the $298 for the gas water heater, they pay that goes to the general fund. And then the planning staff is the one who would fund that. So it would come out of Jonathan's budget, the planners.
The expenses, you mean?
The expenses for running through all that.
That's correct.
So now if we go to the electric water heater, which is a $0 permit. So Jonathan still has to pay for the expenses. Who reimburses him?
So this is the difference between the transaction happening on the city side versus on the applicant side. So right now, staff's recommending it occur on the applicant side. And the reason for that is actually exactly what you identified. The applicant would pay for that permit. Those revenues would go into the general fund to offset the cost to deliver that service. And the starts with an R. Rebate. Thank you. Sorry. The rebate would actually come from the electric fund. And so we would cut a check, essentially. I say that figuratively. It depends on how the transaction proceeds. But for all intents and purposes, you cut a check from the electric fund to the resident from the appropriate electric funds.
Is that coming out of cap and trade, or is that just coming out of?
Depends on the program, but a lot of them are coming out of either cap and trade for the gas fund and or the low carbon fuel standard funds. We also have public benefit funds. So it's not coming from the rate base, but it's coming from one of those.
I meant to ask one other question, which on the gas permit subsidy that we're looking at doing through the general fund, is it legally permissible that the gas utility would pay that subsidy rather than the general fund?
I think there's a mix up there. You're talking about the rebate for the gas, for keeping the gas, the gas permit fees low, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Sarah, you want to?
So the cost of service for us to provide that service comes from the general fund. And usually what happens is when someone pays the fee, that comes back into the general fund to cover those costs at 100%. So what we're asking today is that because we're proposing this subsidy, that means the general fund will be providing that $50,000 to.
Yeah,
close the
I
gap.
got that. What I'm exploring is something that may or may not be feasible,
Correct.
which is the subsidy would come from the
I
gas
see.
utility. And the balance of
In other words, the gas utility subsidizing that $50,000 from some sort of fund. I think we'd probably need to check with the attorneys on
50,000
that.
and growing in future years, we said.
But if we're already doing electric is paying for electrification, electric utilities are paying for electrification costs. I think this would be the same type of
Maybe.
spirit.
They're non-rate revenues that we're using on the electrification side of things. And so we would need to look into the regulations of the gas non-rate revenues and as well as the cost of service
That's
study.
why I qualified my question, and I'm not assuming we can, but I don't know whether we've explored it.
I think we did look at it, but I don't know that we looked at it deeply. So
We'll have to double check, but I think the gas non-rate revenues are unlikely to be able to be used for that purpose.
Okay, so unlikely, yes, strong preference that if it were permissible, that would be my preference.
And I think if the committee wanted to give that kind of direction that it's permissible, if staff finds it to be legally permissible, please do it this way. If not, do it the other way. Then I think that's sufficient enough that we could take that clear.
Yes, Kyle Ariano, Chief Assistant City Attorney. I think we understand the question and the sort of the policy goal there. The analysis always comes down to what is the source of this revenue, what types of strings are attached, and whether those strings prohibit us from advancing any one of these kinds of policy goals. So, we can look at, for example, cap and trade or low carbon fuel. What does the S stand for? Standards, thank you. And a public benefit as essentially revenue sources for these other types of incentives and programs. Generally speaking, rate revenue has the most restrictions against it.
But my understanding is, and it doesn't mean that this is going to prevail, is that on the rate revenue, the great restrictions are that one user group can't subsidize another user group. But this would be the same user group subsidizing themselves, right?
Yes. Totally understand the logic. I think that the challenge for us is developing the analysis to support wherever it is we land. And I think, one other consideration is that as a practical matter, sort of doesn't matter to the utility consumer because we provide all of the utilities. So, they see whatever you want to call it. I think PG&E calls it a climate credit, but we could call it something else. They get one statement that shows all of their, all of their utility costs for that billing period, and they see a credit against it. And I think that's probably the main concern.
You see a credit against it?
No,
Or whatever whatever.
No, in my mind, it would simply be part of that cost of that
And that's
user group.
And that's the additional analysis that we would need to undertake, whether you recognize or account for that cost in the rate structure itself or somewhere else along the back end.
Yeah, I was assuming it would be in the rate structure, but rate structure for each group separately. Yeah. But okay, so we can make that request and include that if we so choose. Keith?
Yeah, one last question about going back to slide 4. I don't want to make work for staff, but I also want to simplify the process. And so how much work is it? The accounting work that we don't like option 2, or is it that someone might pull a permit and then actually not sign off that permit? What's the driver?
When we were going through the options, I think you're inquiring about option 2, right?
Yep.
One of the things we discussed is that the customer would still need to come back to verify that that they followed through on installing and doing the inspections. And so either way, there's kind of a follow-up required. And so it's much easier on our end for the accounting process to actually have us not have this separate tracker since the customer has to come back anyways. And Jonathan, do you want to add anything to that?
I think just the other issue there is that the customer still has to go to utilities to get their rebate anyway. So it doesn't really save the customer much in terms of or anything in terms of effort.
When do you mean they have to go to utilities?
Well, so we offer, so as a city, we offer rebates for people to electrify their water heaters. And so if you go and electrify your water heater, you're going to file for that rebate. And what we're talking about in option 1 is just delivering the permit rebate through the same rebate mechanism as the person would use to get their rebate for the entire electrification project. So for example, a heat pump water heater, there's the $3,500 rebate. They're going to get that $3,500 rebate. So we just add the $298 rebate along with it when we give them the $3,500 rebate, and that saves us from doing the accounting work.
So I think Councilmember what he's saying is that to get the reimbursement, so you're pulling a permit to install a piece of equipment. And there's two things that we're talking about providing funding for, both the permit cost and the equipment cost. What this process option 2 would do is roll just the permit cost rebate into at the time of the issuance of the permit, but that customer still has to go get the other rebate for the equipment. So they have to do the equipment rebate through a separate program no matter what. So since it's 6-1, like they have to do it, why create the additional administrative work and overhead if they're gonna want the rebate for the equipment anyway?
Would this go to the council on a consent? Because if it doesn't, I'd suggest a flow chart.
Yeah.
I think this will go with the,
These are all coming back as a part of the fee schedule on June 16th.
so it's part of it is an action item, but it is part of the, proposed operating capital, muni fee schedule,
If it's
utility
not
rates.
too much work, a flow chart might help everybody grasp this. Yeah.
Okay.
So I would move the, thank you. Do we have public comment?
No public comment.
Okay, I was guessing that. Okay, so I'll move the staff recommendation with the addition of a 2A, which is direct staff to explore whether the gas appliance permit subsidy could be paid for by the gas utility.
Second.
Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye, that passes unanimously. Thank you. All right. So now we move on to item number 2, which is a recommendation to the council to approve the citywide cost of services study and propose municipal fee adjustments.
Hello, Chair. That would be me.
All right. Lauren, take it away.
Good evening, Finance Committee. Lauren Lai, the Chief Financial Officer. The item before you is a citywide cost of service study and proposed fee adjustments. Next slide, please. With us online virtually is Courtney Ramos, who is the Senior Vice President of Matrix Consulting Group. They are the firm that conducted the cost of service study. The cost of service study is a time study of various transactions or on average transactions that we have on our fee schedule. So Courtney is available for any questions this evening. The services covered in the study include ASD for revenue collections and real estate, city clerk's office, community services, fire, emergency medical services, police. Let's see. We also have animal control under police as well. When we do these studies, it really helps ensure that our revenues are aligned with the cost of providing those services, which is really important when it comes to fees versus taxes. And it's also very important relative to our city council's cost recovery goals. So we're providing this information to you. Attachment A shows the schedule of current fees, total cost, and then the proposed fee, and then the fee policy. Next slide, please. As a reminder, you may recall this is the 2015 cost recovery policy. This was brought to you as a part of the PDS cost recovery item that we just sat in an hour ago that was brought up about a month ago as well. So in 2015, there's a policy that relates to cost recovery levels, low, medium, high cost recovery, depending on the level of personal versus community benefit. Each of the fees back then, or categories of fees, I should say, were bucketed into these various categories, and that guides how we set cost recovery and then also the annual updates as well. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the cost study is really a time study. So I won't go into that too much. Courtney can answer any questions there. For brevity, I'd like to go ahead and go into the fees themselves and what we're recommending tonight before you. So in the administrative fees, we have revenue collections and real estate. So most of these fees are in the high cost recovery category between 70 to 100%. So those kinds of fees include duplications, parking permit investigation, and property conveyance. On the city clerk side, these primarily are governed by state law. One fee is being eliminated. We have several new fees for copy, whether it's black and white or colors, and one proposed fee increase in the city clerk. So that relates to domestic partner registry. All of these are within the cost recovery policy range. There are a few departments where they are proposing a change to those ranges, and I'll go into that a little bit. So in this case, that one fee adjustment falls within the band of 70 to 100%. Okay, next slide, please. Community services, as noted in the report, the recreation and Coverly divisions recover 61% on average, and then rental recovers 130%. Both of these are consistent with industry norms, and also for the purpose of rentals, there's a lot of personal choice and options that we offer here in the city that make it more desirable, and hence the cost recovery for rentals is higher than the cost itself. Those fees for CSD will be coming forth to this Finance Committee next week. Some of those will go up by GRI, some of those will be flat. And so those will come forward next week. As it relates to the fire emergency medical services, this is where we have a very low cost recovery for a number of reasons. The cost recovery in this category of services is 28% of the full cost. The shortfall there is about $12 million. You'll see in this schedule for fire, we are recommending that those be adjusted up to actual cost per the study. When we say actual cost, categorically, it still falls within the cost recovery of 30 to 70%, because not everything that we bill is collectible and not everything is billable. In addition, you'll see that we also have a new fee, which is the first responder fee. Fire has spoken to that a couple of times during the fire emergency and ambulance response study sessions that we've had. So that is being brought before you on this schedule, and that would be $497 on the schedule. Okay. Next slide, please. For police and animal control, there's a variety of under and over recovery. But in general, we are under recovering for these categories of fees. Two things to note here. We are proposing that the fees reflect the actual cost. And then also the pricing, especially on the animal control side, is to incentivize pet owners to alter their animals. So we do have the pricing structured where unaltered animals are a higher fee than altered animals, and that's very common in most jurisdictions. In addition, you'll see on the schedule exhibit attachment A, the department is also recommending modification of cost recovery policy, moving some of these from high to medium in line with what they are seeing in the current practice. And that really relates to event rates, especially if they relate to nonprofit events, you'll see there on attachment A. Rather than having high cost recovery, in the spirit of what we want to do here, staff is recommending medium cost recovery policy for those categories. Animal control, likewise, To incentivize cost recovery and the right behaviors, the animal licensing are moving from low to medium or high cost recovery. And you'll see those on attachment A as well. Next slide, please. On the public works side, we have a mix of cost recovery. A lot of this cost study basically updates the hourly rates to current labor cost. And so when we have to bill for incidents, we can then bill for proper cost recovery based on staff and costs and benefits. Also, we have fees now aligned with review efforts. If you'll notice in storm drains, these relate to flood variances and flood zone determinations. The cost recovery here is oftentimes between 80 to 100%. We are proposing new fees, and these fees would align with actual costs. Lastly, on wastewater treatment, these relate to industrial water discharge and recycle water, for example. All of these fees have been under recovered. And so they are below the 80 to 100% range that we target. We are proposing these fees reflect actual cost. However, we do have a couple of areas of subsidies which are consistent with the fee policy. Next slide. Fiscal impact upon full implementation. That means, for example, first responder would be fully implemented. We would anticipate $1 million or more of general fund new revenues. For fiscal 26, our estimate is 700,000 because we do want to, be conservative that some of these programs may not be fully implemented. And so that 700,000 would be above the fiscal 26 budget that was just published on Friday. So staff's recommendation is for Finance Committee to review, give us any feedback, but then also recommend to the council that these fees would be reflected in the schedule that we'll bring to council on June 16th. They would take effect July 1st of the new fiscal year. We are available, staff is available also online. We have various department members. I want to acknowledge the staff members from all the departments that worked with Matrix, and also Matrix is also available online to answer any questions you have. So thank you so much.
Thanks. And do we have any public speakers?
No public comment.
Okay, free reign. All right, Julie?
Thank you, Lauren. Appreciate you. And who did you say is online from Matrix?
Courtney Ramos.
Courtney. Okay. Thank you so much for this. Boy, this is a great way to understand what is going on in the city. Let me tell you, it's so granular. I just want to walk through the packet if I could, because I have a bunch of questions and I'm just going to go page by page in order rather than try to group them in a way that makes more topical sense.
And if it helps, the clerk can also put the packet online. So just let us know.
Okay. Packet page 17, the domestic partners registration fee caught me off guard. It made me wonder why anyone needs to achieve that through the city when the state offers domestic partner licenses for less. Do we have any idea why this is part of our business?
Is it our legacy? I don't know if you know, but Joe Smidian put through in, I think, 1995, kind of below the radar domestic partner registry long before I think almost anyone else did. And I'm just wondering whether this has stayed on the books ever since then.
That is a beautiful reason.
But I don't know.
Who knows?
Sure.
But let's find out.
Courtney, are you smiling and able to respond, or am I reading the room wrong?
I am able to respond if you, I don't know if there was actually a question for me, but no, I think there are often times you will leave certain fees on a fee schedule just in case you might need them in the future. I agree. I don't know that this is necessarily one that would be needed, although there's no harm in keeping something like that on your fee schedule.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to the next one, ASD real estate. My question here, Lauren, is if you look at the second and the third items, the consent to assignment and the easement document, the total cost is $1648 for each. And we're recommending that one stay at $1648 and one get bumped up to $1155. And yet the total cost for both is the same. It just makes me wonder, why isn't it the same increase?
Yes, so noted there is the cost recovery column where it's high is 70% to 100%. So the first line there, our current fee is $780. Total cost is $1648. We're staying within kind of a moderate portion of that range. We didn't want to bump it up to $1648. Finance committee today can say, yes, we want full cost recovery because we want to bring in that revenue. We are trying to respect the range there. On the one right below it, the current fee is $1,700. Actual cost is $1648. We just brought it down to $1648. If finance committee says, you know what, if that's our cost is $1648 in both rows based on this review, we wish to make both of them $1648, that would be fine too.
Okay, thank you. On the next page, you've got a couple that are claimed to be increases to the high level, but I think the math is off. Under revenue collections, documents and photocopies mailing, recommended fee $10. Total cost $23. That is definitely not 70 to 100%. And $15 for the duplicate receipt against a total cost of $36. Again, you're under. So I just wanted to point those out, and for what it's worth. Well, I guess what I wanted to know is, did you mean to hike the fee higher and bring it into the 70 to 100% cost recovery rate, or did you mean to actually set it at the medium cost recovery?
The latter.
Okay.
Just for the nature of what we're doing, and we kind of reached out to a couple of other, some of our peers, that did not seem in line with making a duplicate copy of a receipt for someone at the counter.
So just that part of the chart needs to be amended to go from high to medium then?
We could do that. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on to page 23, Public Works has so many things going on. And I think you find yourself wondering, my gosh, are we splitting hairs? And is Matrix looking at the staff time that goes, the staff time and cost of staff time that goes into assessing or trying to pull out the list of the various fees when they're so close together? Would anyone recommend that there is some utility in saying, you know what, let's make these all an even 179 or an even 168 or what have you? You know, when I look at that first chart under maintenance and repair, regular time and overtime and holiday, that's the question that came to mind.
Courtney, were you able to capture that question?
Yeah, so I think, I think the variety of different services that are provided for the different staff or for the different types of services, right? Sweeping services versus traffic control versus traffic property damage. You could just say, you know what, all services provided by maintenance and repair, we're going to use a blended rate, so to speak, and just make it 1 per hour. I think that does simplify it in a way. However, depending on how often you're providing the different services, it could mean that you are subsidizing services to a greater level than what you're looking for. This isn't uncommon to see, these broken out in this way. So while it kind of looks, I'll say busy to you or I or to some member of the public, I think a lot of people who would be utilizing this portion of the fee schedule would not look at it in that particular way.
Thank you.
It is an option.
Thank you, Courtney. I'm going to turn now to your report. The first thing that I want to say is we're often criticized as city leaders for working with consultants, and members of the public will say these consultants, they work for all different kinds of cities and they make all this money off of, just cutting and pasting. And unfortunately, at the back of your document, you reference Thousand Oaks twice. And
Okay.
And however Thousand Oaks may feel about showing up in our report, I think the larger question is what can you reassure us that it was just the last 2 pages that are really a cut and paste with Thousand Oaks, and that none of these data are actually theirs instead of ours?
I can assure you that actually, it's a factor of working 2 reports in time, and so going back and forth between those 2 reports. I can certainly make sure that that gets updated, but I can assure you that all of the data, all of the time estimates, all the budget information, all the calculations are Palo Alto.
Thank you. When we look at the user fee study methodology, packet page 32, your page 7, we learned that indirect costs are comprised of departmental admin, services and supplies, and citywide overhead, et cetera. And it feels to me that citywide overhead, et cetera, is an enormous bucket. And how do you reassure us that that's not, we're familiar with the indirect costs challenges that universities nearby have had to deal with, where you're putting too many things into that bucket and losing credibility. And something as broad as citywide overhead makes me fear that we might be putting a few too many things into the indirect bucket. But this is not my expertise at all. So I'm just wondering, how would you just, when somebody challenges you on why does all of citywide overhead get chopped up into indirect fees, like why is that not too general or lacking in specificity?
So I think, obviously we're generalizing it, be brief. The city does have a cost allocation plan that identifies, it details all of those different indirect costs. They're primarily related to things like human resources, finance, city manager, city clerk, so forth. And not to go too much into the cost allocation plan portion, but you do utilize a lot of different metrics, right? So you look at all of those costs. It's not all of those costs that get allocated out to each department. And really the inclusion of that indirect cost is important so that you, as the decision makers and as the stakeholders, understand what is the total cost of providing that service, right? So that's really what it does, is it gives us all those different components, much just like a private business would do, right? Understanding what is it costing you to put that hamburger out for the public, or to make a cell phone or anything like that, and then to understand and have it be up to you to say, what of those costs do we think we should be recovering? So component by component, those direct costs, those salary and benefits of the staff who are actually handling and administering those permits, the indirect support, the administrative staff, the supervisory staff who might not necessarily be touching those individual items, but are supporting the staff that do. And then that citywide overhead, right? The finance staff and the HR staff who are providing benefit support, processing payroll, accounting for transactions, and all of that other support all goes into what is it actually costing the city to provide that service.
Thank you. Jumping ahead to Community Services Department, and I know we have Director O'Kane here as well, and which is great. On packet page 40, Matrix Consulting Group, page 15, under Open Space, Parks, and Golf, we see that these 3 are lumped together. They are a subset of CSD, and that their average direct cost recovery is 39%. Full cost 33% with indirect included. But when you look at them, golf is recovering at 140%, facilities at 9%, parks at 10%, that's for direct. And total, it's golf at 124%, and the rest of them at 7% and 8%. So in the aggregate, the average puts us within the range that is, considered normal or acceptable in the industry. But I think if I was a golfer, I would be worried or mad that my activities were really subsidizing these other things. So I'm really asking the question of, do we batch them like this for this reason, so we can kind of spread these costs across things that seem similar enough? But is it fair?
Can I follow on to that on the golf? These are direct costs. So this is the total revenue that we receive from green fees and driving range, and what percent of the direct costs that is, and that excludes both the indirect costs and the debt service. Is that correct?
Courtney, we're talking about the table 12 in the report. I don't have the background on what's in the table. It says full costs. Yes, thank you.
Yes, I do believe it excludes debt service.
Yeah, so when we rebuilt the golf course, we're still paying off a debt service. And I will add that when that course got redone, we've established it's a high caliber public course now, as well as being a environmental model course. And we're getting significant green fees from non-residents now. And I forget the comparative rate of residents to non-residents, but it's a different price range significantly. Now, even the resident price range went up when we redid the course. So that was heartburn by some of the residents who enjoyed playing a lesser caliber course at lower cost. But my recollection is we're still paying off that debt service, right?
Yes, absolutely. It's a 30-year debt obligation. So we redid it less than 10 years ago, I think.
In the budget, if I recall right, we get that breakdown under golf of all those expenses, not just
That's
this
correct.
direct.
Yes, you are remembering correctly. In the CSD department section, there is an inset, like a subset reconciliation that shows the golf operations, and it does include the debt service, so we can look at total cost. I will say it is, to your point, when it was redone, the fees did go up, as it is a regional draw at this point and was designed as such. And so it is obviously feasible and legal for the costs to be at a higher level, as long as obviously there's market competitiveness. There's also a revenue sharing agreement with the operator. So to the extent the operator generates a certain level of revenue above certain targets, we share in that. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship, meaning, they're incentivized to set it so that they have high usage.
So we'll get another bite at that apple.
I had a similar concern under recreation and cover relief for parks, fields, and courts, recovering at 198%, and the others, some of them far lower. And to the extent we're trying to peg these cost recovery percentages in some range that's acceptable according to the industry standard, it just feels as if just because the average is right doesn't mean that, at a more granular level, that the individual line items are where we would want them to be.
Sure. And I think, Councilmember, you ultimately are bringing up a discretionary policy call for this council to make. These are recreational fees, and so all of these rates and ranges are within what's legally acceptable, right? This isn't a development fee where we're imposing it on someone. These are optional, so they're allowed to be at different levels. And so choosing to have fees at a cost recovery rate based on where the market is, and in other areas subsidizing activities, is a policy call.
On the first responder fee, which comes up under fire EMS, matrix page 18, packet page 43, I was intrigued by the first responder rate. I think I get it. I get the need for it, given that so much of the expense of this department is not fully recovered, because people pay back at different rates depending on their insurance. Nevertheless, I'm concerned about disincentivizing people from calling 911. We want to incentivize the right behavior. You don't want to treat 911 like a limo service or like an Uber. Like, I think I don't feel well, I'm going to call, the paramedics, but we also don't want it to be prohibitive and have people say, you know what, I cannot undertake the cost of potentially being transported, therefore I'm not going to call them. And I'm just wondering what we've done to determine the impact this fee might have on people feeling comfortable accessing emergency services?
So is this a question of like behavior economics again? Because I'm afraid I didn't study that, and I'm not being sarcastic. We really don't know. So Courtney, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think anecdotally, this is a common fee that you see in a lot of EMS related fee schedules. I think the other thing is the concern about dissuading people, if I'm going to change out my water heater, if I know that I need to pull a permit for a water heater, I might go and look and see what that fee is. Generally, people are not looking at the fee schedule to see what is the cost of the ambulance ride before they take the ambulance ride. In fact, I think a lot of people are unaware, much like the water heater permit, that there are these fees associated with those services. So I think from a concern, if your concern is that implementing this fee would dissuade people from calling 911, I think that there would be a very limited, very minimal impact associated with that, just because I don't think many people are aware that these fees exist or how these fees work.
You know who is aware? You know who is aware is poor people. Poor people and low-income people are aware. They're very aware.
And Councilmember, I think we've also got Amber Cameron from the fire department who can talk about some of our strategies to help manage that.
Thank you very much. Good evening, council members. Amber Cameron, Senior Management Analyst for the Fire Department. Specifically for the first responder fee, this is going to be added into the fees that we're charging only to commercial insurance. So these fees are not going to be charged to underinsured or uninsured patients. So that might help address the issue. This is not a fee that someone on Medicaid or Medicare is going to have to be paying out of pocket, or somebody that's uninsured is going to have to be paying out of pocket.
Thank you so much for that. That's helpful. And then finally, to the impound fee, detailed results of police cost per unit results, matrix group, page 26, packet page 51. The vehicle impoundment fee, the vehicle repossession receipt, and the towed store vehicle fee. Do we do any kind of determination as to whether someone is at fault before charging a fee? If you've been a victim of a hit and run and your car was towed and impounded, are you charged that fee, or is the person who hit you charged that fee, or does no one pay that fee?
I think we have a couple of individuals from the police department. I'm wondering if either of them can speak to this question.
Yeah, Assistant Chief Reifschneider, I can talk to that. We routinely assess when folks come in. So these fees are collected from someone when they ultimately come to us to get their vehicle back out of storage, typically. So we routinely assess at the time they're here at the police department whether it's appropriate to waive those fees. And it may be because we found that they weren't at fault, or that there was some extenuating circumstance. So the supervisors and our record staff have the ability to make that assessment.
Right. Thank you. That's it for me, Chair.
Yeah, I have a bunch, but chime in if I'm talking about something that you want to talk about, because it may be more efficient. On slide 2, we have those 3 categories, and I would think that I would want a 4th category that would be, we want full cost recovery. We don't want 70 to 100%. We want, this is something that we do, but we don't want to subsidize. And to me, that's a distinct category, and I would think that that would be useful to have a 4th category. Anyway, that's my soapbox there. So if we go to, for example, packet page, packet page 18. These conveyance fees would be one thing where I don't think we want to subsidize this. I mean, We don't want to gouge people, but we also don't, we want full cost recovery because we have better ways of spending our money. I did have some, let's see. Yeah, okay. And then next one would be packet page 18. Packet page 20. That's the fire fees. So the reason we're doing the first responder fee is because these other fees that we have full cost recovery on them. Right? I think all of them, but yet they're not fully recoverable because insurance doesn't cover everything. Why do we think that the first responder fee would be recoverable when the other fees are not?
It's
Amber.
I could take that one again. Thank you.
Thanks, Amber.
Yeah, great question. So we have, there are other city fire departments that are charging this first responder fee already. And our billing vendor, so the city uses a ambulance billing vendor to bill insurance, for our ambulance transports. And the current vendor for that is Digitech, and we've had a number of meetings with them to discuss this fee. And the way that we are going to be charging this fee is as a sort of a bundle bill to our commercial insurance providers. So it's going to be added on to their normal bill. And commercial insurance providers are obligated to pay the fees that we are charging them for ambulance transports.
Oh, wow. Okay. So when you say commercial, you mean a business as opposed to?
Yeah, yes. Sorry. Yeah, let me back up and provide. So commercial insurance is the term that we use to refer to insurances like Blue Shield, Kaiser, any sort of insurance provider that you get through your employer. The reason why we are overall not cost recovery as a whole is because quite a few of our patients are on insurance programs through the government, which would be Medicaid and Medicare. And those programs have caps on what they will pay us as a whole. So we typically get about $1,000 from Medicaid and Medicare for each transport, even though we may be, charging $2,500 right now. And that is because they have an overall cap. So we can add it to the bill, but we won't be receiving that money. And the estimates of additional revenue that are included in this report take that into consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up on that? First responder. Remind me, I think you had said before, but what proportion of other communities are charging first responder fees? Do we have a sense of that?
I would say it's a mix. Some jurisdictions have it called out as a separate fee, while other jurisdictions pre-bundle it in their rates. So the costs are being accounted for on other fee schedules, but like I said, it's a mix between some who will pre-bundle it in like the BLS or ALS rate, and other jurisdictions that will call it out as a separate line item.
But given that if we charge this, it would be an additional 5 million in revenue, does that mean we're not pre-bundling it? Oh, I'm sorry. Did I misread that somewhere?
Yeah, it's definitely not 5 million.
Definitely not.
I was looking at packet page 48, billed versus total cost. But that's our everything. Okay, so it's 400,000, you said? Okay. So either way, I just realized that, tell me if this is not correct, that if insurers are covering it when it's charged, it's built into their insurance rates. for everybody. And they're not charging different rates for cities that do charge this separately from those that do. So cities that are not charging it, the residents are essentially in their private insurance rates subsidizing the cities that do. To a degree. I mean, it's not, may not be a massive part of the their insurance costs, but I would think that's the way it works. Okay, I just thought I'd mention that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Next is packet page 21, where we talk about special events. And I think the descriptions here are not quite right, because the first category is where 100% of the proceeds go to a profit organization. I think that means, because the second category is where at least 80% of the proceeds go to a nonprofit. So if I had something where 79% of the proceeds go to nonprofit, I would be in the first category, wouldn't I? It seems like there's no category. If I have 79% of the proceeds going to a nonprofit, there's no category for me right now. I think the first category is the catch-all, and then we have some exemptions and say, well, but if you have 80% of the proceeds going to nonprofit, we'll give you a break. So I think the title for the first one has to be fixed up. Okay. So then the next page is,
Councilmember, it says go to a profit organization, whereas the subsequent ones say a nonprofit.
yeah, but it says we're 80% of the proceeds. If I have something, let's say I'm going 50% goes to a profit and 50% goes to a nonprofit. Where is that covered?
No subsidy. So,
So wouldn't that would go in the first category, wouldn't it?
so it would go into the first category. So I think
really
we need to broaden the definition of the first category.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
got it.
because we're giving a break to two specific categories, and anyone who doesn't get a break goes in the first category. Okay, then later down on that page, we also have some special event permits. And in those cases, we don't distinguish whether this is a for-profit company or whether this is a nonprofit. And I would think that would be the same type of thing. I mean, some of these are quite high, $2,000 of real cost it is if we have a large event. But if some big company is having their Christmas party, I don't think the taxpayer should be subsidizing that. I would want full cost recovery. But if Actera or something is having something, then I can see, okay, we'll give you a break. And so I would like to see that special event permit broken out into nonprofit and for-profit, just like you did above.
Can we, so if we break it out, are you wanting the nonprofits to be subsidized and leave the fees the way they are? Or are you wanting us to increase?
Yeah, I would say if it's a for-profit company, just like you did up there, for the first category and under special events, you have full cost recovery for all those.
Correct. So
I would want to change the special fees to be full cost recovery for anything that's not a nonprofit.
okay, so let me paraphrase back. If I'm looking at special events right now, the fees are within the range, but they're not all 100%. Sounds like they should all be at 100% and then have nonprofits be discounted.
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, Pat and Julie, what do you think of that?
I like it. And I think I was just looking to see where the CSD fees are, because I would want whatever, this is just the police line. I would want that logic to apply to event rentals, to rental space for special events. Similarly, are nonprofits charged a rate that's different than for-profits? I would hope it would align with that. The police officer who shows up is a component of the event. The room rental is an even bigger cost, I would assume, and it should be aligned.
So Director O'Kane just affirmed, yes, we have a nonprofit rental rate. So it would be sufficient direction for the committee to say align, a nonprofit fee with others.
So I just want to confirm CSD already has that practice and we'll just update the police section for special events accordingly.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, we had that whole thing about Palantir renting out Cumberly, right?
Yeah, they rented basically all of Coverly Fields and everything, and the public couldn't use it for
For a long
couple
time.
days,
Yeah.
and I never realized we were actually subsidizing it.
So I will know, obviously, changing fees like this in concept, right? You're going to increase your cost recovery if it's for profit, and perhaps that will additional revenue will offset the cost of the nonprofit usage. Staff has not done this analysis in terms of what the revenue impact is. So I don't have a sense of volume in one or the other at this time, and I don't know that staff is able to tonight articulate at that granular of a level.
I guess we have to be careful because if the market rate is below our cost recovery, then by making full cost recovery, we may actually decrease the revenue we get because this cost numbers includes a whole bunch of overhead that we're going to spend regardless. Our incremental cost is not reflected in this. So we have to be careful knowing what the market rate is.
I also want to call your attention that I think when we look at the fees on that schedule, the hourly rates can add up pretty fast, right? Because this is staff time. That's where nonprofits are getting the discount. For special events, these others are per permit. So I don't want to discount the discussion, but I think the fiscal impact to a nonprofit is less of a burden because, for example, we have a permit, $407. It's a one-time permit, whereas staffing, that could be 4 hours of a position. So just want to check in and see if this is a type of overhaul we want to do on this exercise or kind of okay with where it is.
I would want staff to ponder it and give us a recommendation when it comes to council. You might say that this is too big a bite to take off and we want to do it next year. You might say, we think this is a bad idea for this reason, or you might say this is a good idea. I would want you to think about it and give us.
Yes, and I'm not sure what the process is for police. Maybe police can chime in, but if we were to distinguish for-profit versus nonprofit, does that create more staff time in evaluating the applicants and then determining what fee to charge? I want to also check in on the process. Or maybe it goes through CSD.
Right.
Does this go through CSD and this is a fee that they just pick up?
So PD issues special event permits, but we coordinate with them. What I did want to call out is, so some of our rentals are by for-profit or nonprofit. Some are a resident rate and a non-resident rate, and some are a group rate, no matter who you are. So we're not consistent in community services on that. So there could be instances where a special event is in an area where we charge a fee that's for resident, non-resident, not for-profit and nonprofit.
And to add complexity to this, we then have to make a decision on how we define nonprofit. I know 501c3 from an IRS perspective, but there are community groups, other unincorporated organizations, right, that are not necessarily at a level where they're an IRS group kind of. And so how would you make those distinctions? And so I think that lends to what Director O'Kane is saying in terms of, some of them are resident versus non-resident, some of them are for-profit versus nonprofit.
Earlier on, we distinguished, and so I would say just use that same definition, however we currently do it.
And if I may, within the community service fees, how do we make those distinctions? Do we have nonprofits that are not 501c3s that are not using some other fiscal agent that come along and want the nonprofit rate and we somehow know who to give it to?
So that is also complex. So because if we look at our co-sponsorship policy, which it says 501c3 or similar organization, including a different 501, but it doesn't, so we need to update that language to be very specific because and similar organization could be someone who functions like a 501c3 but isn't actually registered. So in the case of So that's really what we base it on. In the case of rentals, we would, I think, request that they be a 501c3.
Okay. Move on to packet page 22. And this is the dog impoundment fees. And as they have more offenses, the rates go up. What is the definition of offense? Is that just a dog gets loose and we catch him, or there's some biting incident, or what?
Please, staff, can you answer this question about animal control and what's deemed an offense? Hi, Eric.
Yeah.
Assistant Chief.
Thank you, Eric Jensen, Police Department. Thanks for the question. You're talking about let me just make sure I'm right in the right spot. You're talking about the dangerous animal permit fee?
No, this is impoundment fees. This is
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Packet page 22.
Yeah, so those fees are basically for animals that get away and our animal control officers have to recover.
Okay, and we have repeat offenders here. We have some dogs that are very.
Yes, we do.
5th to 10th offense.
Yeah, and this 11th and subsequent.
Yes,
and so
we do.
Yes, I think at that point, even the first few, fine, we'll give you a break on that. But I think at certainly 5th to 10th offense, I think we should have full cost recovery. And when you get above 10, then at that point we want to recover. We do. No, we don't even have full cost recovery for. Oh, if it's unlicensed, we have above our cost, but licensed dogs, we don't even have full cost recovery.
Right. So under this model, these are fees and not that are meant to encourage people to keep their animals contained. But while they are fees and they are somewhat punitive, they're not the kind of punishment that belongs in the municipal code, which is where a lot of those things are. So in this instance, you'll notice the fees for the first, second, third offense gradually increase. And then it was staff's decision by the fourth offense that it starts increasing much more significantly. If that makes sense. And then the other consideration, I mean, there's always a number of considerations when you're deciding what the fee is going to be. But the other consideration was, what is the new fee compared to what is the old fee, so that we can get compliance. I'm sure when I say compliance, I mean recover the fee, so to speak. So there's no collections. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But again, if a dog has gotten out 5 times before, I would want full cost recovery if we have to go after him number 6, 7, 8.
Sure.
And
we can have staff take a look at that.
And then I noticed, okay, so it makes sense that if they're licensed, we'll give you a break. If you're unlicensed, we'll charge you more. But then okay, so we never go above. This is something that we can't charge more. We have to, the max we can get is 100% cost recovery. Do you know?
So I will point out that, and I don't know if this is just an error on our part, but if you look at the impoundment fee for an unlicensed dog at the 11th and subsequent offense, the recommended fee in this case is $246, which is actually the current fee that we're charging. So we're not asking it to change from the current year. But as a result of the cost analysis done by Matrix, the cost is only $213. And it's basically 1 hour of animal control officer charge is what it takes to, to round up the animal, find the owner, and then, return it and then write a little report on it. So in this case, we do charge over the cost. And so I'd have to have, Courtney would have to kind of weigh in on that one to see how that sits.
I think technically these are treated as penalties, in which case you can exceed the cost of service. And you could certainly, I could see where the case would be made for, first offense, second offense, shame on you. Make sure your dog, the fence is locked and the door's closed and all that. But as you get to that third, fourth, certainly by the fifth offense, there should be the incentivization, right?
Can I ask relatedly, why would we interact with an unlicensed dog so many times? Why isn't the cost of getting your dog back from impoundment including the cost of licensing your dog?
Well, so I mean, let's keep this in mind that this dog could be unlicensed or it gets out year 1, they're licensed, the license expires in year 3, they get out again. So think about it in terms of the life of the dog. And so I also think that this discussion has brought to our attention that we need to do a quick check to make sure that, to Courtney's point, if it is a fee in the schedule, this is something that would only be up to 100% cost recovery. But as Courtney identified, it's absolutely okay if it's in a penalty schedule for it to go beyond. So I think thank you to everybody for identifying this. Let us take that back. And if the committee wants to think about penalties versus fees, that's a different structure.
I take it some of these are really not very common. The pig and goat impoundment is that do we have a lot of escapees from goat yoga? Yeah.
I don't see a fee for escape goats. I don't think that's in that category, is it?
Oh, it's listed. Impoundment fee, other animals.
Under large animals, Eric.
It says right there.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, okay.
And I figured that was the yoga.
But it could be the cows up on the that graze up by the dish that get out, and we've had to recover those.
There we go.
It'd be really useful because some of these, which some of these can only be full cost recovery, and some of them can go above cost recovery. It'd be really nice if there was a check or some type of information saying which category each of these fees go into. Okay, then the next is at the very bottom of that page, quarantine home inspection fee. We're really subsidizing that. Under what conditions is an animal quarantined? Is this is a biter, or is this a?
Eric, can you help with that question?
Yeah. So as I understand it, the animals are quarantined, and it means they're quarantined in their home, because they're under investigation for some kind of possible bite. I don't know the nuances on whether the fee is charged if it's definitive that the animal bit or if it's still just under investigation. So I'd have to get back to you on that one. But there is some nuance to that.
Okay. Assistant Chief, could you weigh in?
So I can speak to the purpose of the quarantine, which is it is following a bite. And really the purpose of the quarantine is really to have the dog be assessed or the animal to be assessed to make sure it's not rabid or otherwise dangerous following a bite. So there's a prescribed quarantine period following any bite. So the inspection is the animal control officer going out to the home or property of the owner to ensure that they have a proper place to quarantine the animal. And if they don't, then we would facilitate quarantining the animal at the shelter.
Okay. And there's fees associated with quarantining them at the shelter?
I believe that would fall under some of the other special fees category where we're charging an hourly rate associated with the animal control officer. And there's likely some other way to charge for the boarding if we have to store the animal for a period of time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I only have a few left here. So thank you for your patience, guys. So packet page 23, we list a bunch of maintenance, and some of these, like sweeping, I see like if someone had a construction site and the city has to go and sweep, we charge them. But other things like tree services, when would we charge a private citizen tree service?
I see Michelle Nelson is online. Michelle, are you able to answer the question about the tree service and hourly charges? Hi, Michelle.
Hey there. Yes, there's various tree services that we would charge residents that are looking for designations on protected trees, damages. Essentially, it's kind of a catch-all if it's a street tree, a city tree. You know, if there's causing some damage to a neighboring property, various non-development related tree services.
If this is a street tree, do I have to pay? Does the resident have to pay for maintenance in front?
Not if it's a city tree, no.
Okay, so this would be on private property that there's a tree and someone wants to cut it down. And so this is just the consulting. The urban forester is going out and saying, okay, so
urban forestry.
This is not guys in chainsaws. This is just the urban forester giving his assessment.
Yes.
Okay, tree service to me. Okay, gotcha. Then they also talk about graffiti services. And how do we charge for graffiti services? This is private property where there's graffiti and they give a warning, and then if they don't cover it up, we go paint it? Or what's the...
Yes, exactly.
Okay. But we give them first shot and saying, hey, you have to clean this up. And that at that point, okay.
Yep. If businesses or residents aren't maintaining that graffiti and we have to do it instead.
Okay. Because getting rid of graffiti, I think, would be a high priority. But if they have a shot at getting it done themselves, then we're fine. Okay. And then packet page. They talk about groundwater at the very bottom of this page, packet page 23. What is the groundwater fees? This is if someone has a well and they're sucking up groundwater?
This is one of the industrial waste discharge fees to the groundwater. I don't know the exact detail. I can ask on what that is, but these are various state water resource and federal regulations for the industrial waste discharge fees of businesses.
Okay.
And that groundwater one, Courtney, is pretty standard among all agencies, right?
That's correct.
Do you have any idea what groundwater discharge of industrial waste? That I'm not aware of any permissible discharge. Maybe it's just we have to have it, but is that a real thing?
So I'm not in the public works department, but I think I can weigh in.
Thank you.
Essentially, you have these 6 classifications of certain kinds of liquid waste, essentially, that people may not discharge into either into the sanitary sewer, into the storm drain. So they need to have someone come and collect it, and then they bring it down and have it disposed of separately down at the.
That's not groundwater.
And so you can also have you have to have groundwater collection as well. So on certain sites, you are pumping out groundwater.
Oh, you're talking about pumped groundwater,
that's right,
as opposed to discharge into groundwater.
That's right. So
that's right. I served on the county wellhead protection program for 10 years that governed that. Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Okay. And I have a couple examples of fees that I thought seemed rather large. One of them was if a flood zone on packet page 23, flood zone determination letter, and we're going to charge $400. And I don't quite understand the fees associated with that, because I can go on the parcel report online and it instantly tells me what a specific parcel has for a flood zone. So how much labor do we have issuing a flood zone determination letter?
I can revisit the staff cost associated with that, but it is all staff cost of our stormwater senior engineer permit technicians that go into issuing those flood zone determination letters. And that's the 419 is the cost to provide it at full cost recovery. That one is 100%. We can certainly lower that if that's the desire of the committee and the council.
Well, I mean, if it's a true cost, I think that we should charge, but it seems to me that I guess if you have a professional person verifying this independently, then it might be building up an hour of his time, but that seems excessive, especially when it's already on a database. I would think you could have an administrative assistant just pull it up and send it out, but I don't know what if there is some legal reason that this has to be properly vetted or reviewed. So anyway, okay, that's one thing. And then on packet page 45, we talk about the mileage calculation for ambulances, and we're charging $31.63 per mile. And that seems, for just a car, what the IRS says, what, 60 cents a mile. This is an order of 50 larger than that. It just seemed at first blush to be a big number. I can't say that isn't correct, but it just kind of surprised me. Okay.
I think one of the things is the order of magnitude compared to the maintenance of your car as compared to the maintenance of an ambulance and or an
But
engine.
are we charging the incremental maintenance for that extra mile, or are we just saying maintenance because
it's annual maintenance, it's fuel, and it's replacement.
yeah,
So
and a lot of those
factors.
miles don't have a passenger in the back, and so are they subsidizing our
You're only paying the fee if you are actually.
yeah. Okay. Anyway, that's
yeah.
Thank you.
Progress. So I let me just go over a couple questions. I have fewer, but thank you, Keith. That was good. Do we know the financial revenue impact of the aggregation of all these fee changes or approximation?
Right now, our estimate is about $1 million, probably more. Upon full implementation, I think in fiscal 26, we would hedge at $700,000, especially because the first responder fee is new. But that $700,000 for the general fund would be above the proposed budget that was published Friday.
You got my next question. Okay. Doesn't mean we can spend it. Okay. And then I do like Keith's concept of perhaps that category of 100% recovery that we want to do. On our middle school, this probably a Kristen question. On our middle school athletics, we cover our overhead costs. Is that right?
Just about.
Yeah.
Yeah, very close.
Okay. And then that covers it for me. Okay, that was easy.
I had one other question I missed. We have $7,000 a year for taxi cabs. What do we? I mean, on one hand, we don't charge anyone who wants to drive an Uber. And do we really have a $7,000 of cost associated with licensing a taxi cab? I mean, to me, what we're saying there is we don't want taxi cabs because they're going to just become Ubers then. But
and historically, for bigger cities, what they call that a
medallion.
Medallion, yeah. We don't have a lot of taxis anymore, do we? And in a way, that really is an unfair disadvantage to licensed taxi cabs versus Ubers, isn't it?
I see police has come on screen. I'd like to give them an opportunity to chime in if you wish.
I would just add that notwithstanding the proposed increase in that fee, I did some checking myself today, and perhaps as a result of ride sharing, but I can't say for sure. We actually haven't had an application for a new taxi license in 5 years. So, not because they've been dissuaded by the proposed new license fee, because that is not yet in effect. The other thing I was informed was that regulations actually allow many of the taxi providers to register in whatever city they do the primary amount of their business. And so what we found is a lot of the taxi providers are registering in San Jose or other larger cities where they do more business.
And if I can just follow up there, so in some ways, it's almost a moot point. Because we're not having a growth in taxi drivers, we're having a growth in other rideshare companies. And they don't have to, these are, once they buy that medallion, they can sell it back and forth to others, I think has been at least in big cities, that's the way it was. Nevertheless, it does seem like an antiquated fee that penalizes taxis over other ride shares. And it may not, it's kind of a moot point because if nobody's coming in for them, but I would be supportive of leveling the playing field some.
By removing the fee, not by charging it across all ride share.
Yeah. Not probably because I don't have a choice. Yeah. So it may not have much real impact. But just on the record, I don't know whether any other cities have been looking at this in a similar way.
Do we really think that $7,000 is our actual cost? Is there some background checks that we have to do?
I know that I don't know if Courtney can speak to that because she did deal with our folks in coming up with that actual cost, but I can say there is definitely more work to be done when issuing a new taxi permit versus the renewal and the updating from year to year.
How about if we just include a referral to re-examine that? Yeah, on a cost basis.
Yeah, I think the new application and process takes roughly 30 hours versus a renewal that takes about 10 hours. And that is inclusive of background checks and
Okay.
other checks that they have to run.
And yet the rideshare companies somehow manage that themselves and minimize it, huh? They have some scrutiny of, but it's apparently a fraction of the 30 hours that we spend. 30 hours, jeez. Do a background check? That's surprising. I don't want to belabor it tonight, but I'd be interested in understanding how we spend 30 hours on that. Okay. We're ready for a motion with whatever referrals. Yes.
Chair, I'd like to just clarify. So typically what happens is on June 16th, council will deliberate on the budget adopted, and then the fees is just a bundled motion. So we're not going to go into it in detail. So what I'm hoping tonight is when the committee makes the motion, we can clarify the items that staff should amend and will incorporate. So we're not going to bring it back or deliberate further. I've been taking some copious notes. If it helps for this committee, I can identify those. Maybe I could do that before the motion. How's that sound?
That'd be great.
Okay, super. So domestic partner registration, we'll review if that's at the state law level and not needed at the local level. If that's the case, we'll strike it from our fee. The ASD policy ranges, have those aligned with the recommended fee, which may be low or medium. There were 2 of them identified. As it relates to real estate conveyance, the desire of this committee expressed tonight is full cost recovery on all conveyanced fees at 100%. As it relates to the special events, the category for the for-profit organization to modify that title so it's more representative based on what Keith expressed. And in the special events as it relates to permitting for police, look at opportunities for nonprofit subsidies. And so we will take a look at how CSD is doing that and then modify it before we bring it back to council on June 16th. The impoundment fees, we will evaluate if those are fees versus penalties. And then to the extent if it's 5 or more, recommend an amount that is higher than the cost, reflective of, wanting people to take care of their animals. The flood zone determination letter is to review the costs and see if it's valid. And as it relates to I think the taxi new license, I think the sentiment tonight is while the $7,000 cost may be high, perhaps bring back a fee that subsidizes it and it doesn't go from about $3,500 to $7,000, but something within that 70 to 100% range. And then last but not least, 2 of the committee members expressed updating the cost recovery policy to reflect a category of 100%. That is a policy action, so we'll note that, but that won't happen as a part of tonight's action because that's a policy.
Good.
I believe I
Julie, are
captured-
you?
I'm in.
She's,
Oh,
so it's
all 3 of you. Okay, great. But that's going to be a separate item because it is a policy document. All right, I hope that reflects the intent of tonight.
The one thing about the taxi fee is I really want full cost recovery for that.
Okay.
But I question whether we really need 30 hours. So I would review both the cost and the actions required for the licensing.
Okay, so we do want full cost recovery, but review the time estimate submitted and see if it's really 30 hours.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, but not spend too much time on it since
Yeah.
probably not going to have any.
Exactly.
And can we get just an informational memo as a follow-up to these so that we don't have to have a public meeting, but just so that we find out which of these had which outcomes? We're trusting the staff's is going to take these and do it with our recommendations, what you can.
sure.
Yeah.
We can reflect that in the May 20th meeting in the Finance Committee wrap-up process. And/or we could also put it with the fee report on June 16th. So either way, let's kind of see how.
We have May 20th, great. If it's not ready by then, 16th sounds good.
Yeah, we'll just do it as an addendum so committee members can read that quick read real quick to indicate the confirmation that these edits were reflected accordingly because it's pretty voluminous, as you noted. Great, thank you.
So on that basis, Keith, do you want to make a motion? You just allude to.
Yeah, I would just say we have the staff motion with the modifications that Lauren just read out.
Second.
All in favor?
All right.
That's unanimous. Unanimous, and that concludes this item. Thank you. And then just review of upcoming meetings.
Wonderful. So in the month of May, we'll have quite a few Finance Committee meetings, which are really focused on the budget. So next week, we'll have 2 sessions, May 6th and 7th, starting at 9 a.m. Then we'll have a session on May 20th, which we characterize as budget wrap-up. Sprinkled in between these meetings or on these agendas are a couple of other items of business as well, such as fiber rates and also investment policy that we bring annually to the Finance Committee. I believe that's it.
Okay. More fun than barrel monkeys. All right. Meeting's adjourned.
Yes.